Congress members don't just face information costs. There are other collective action problems that they have to deal with, such as coordination problems. Coordination problems just mean coordinating action, getting it done. And there are so many members, 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate, and those two chambers, right? And so much work that it can just be difficult to know what issues to address and when to address them. That's why Congress typically addresses issues that are sort of big and on our minds. During COVID, they addressed COVID, but maybe they didn't address every other issue they should have gotten to, because how could they coordinate action on everything all at once? Congress members also face conflicts. How do you coordinate when you have different interests? If I'm we'll go with the numbers here, a Democrat representing Manhattan, such as Jerry Nadler, who represents much of Manhattan, sort of Midtown and the Upper East and West Sides. If I'm Jerry Nadler, a Democrat from Manhattan, I'm probably going to have very different priorities than a, say, Republican Congress member from West Virginia, right? West Virginia is primarily rural, a lot of coal mining. So I'm going to have very different priorities. And how do we work together? How does a Democrat from Manhattan, a very highly populous urban area, work with a Republican from a very rural area? It's not to say they can't, but if they just have completely different interests, how do we get them to cooperate? And on top of this, they have individual goals. Congress members want to get reelected, right? If you don't get reelected, you can't fulfill any of your other goals in Congress. So they have individual goals, and they have individual points of view and ideologies. And this can lead to tensions. Jerry Nadler, a Democrat from Manhattan, might not agree with other Democrats on everything. And he might really want to stress federal funding for mass transit, right? Everyone complains about the MTA all the time. So he might say, I really want to get more federal funds for mass transit. He's also a Democrat, so odds are he supports climate change amelioration, which is to say that he supports doing something to stop climate change. And mass transit may be a way to help prevent more climate change because it cuts down on fuel emissions from individual cars. So he might really prioritize this. But maybe a Democrat from, say, upstate New York, the Buffalo area, perhaps, might have different priorities. There's no real good mass transit system in Buffalo, but they might really care about federal winterization programs, which help give funds to people to winterize their homes. So these two members have very different priorities, even though they're the same party and the same state. So members have these individual goals that they need to achieve. How do we get people to cooperate? Now, on top of all this, there are transaction costs and there are time pressures. So the Constitution made lawmaking difficult. It did this on purpose. It wanted to avoid tyrannical laws being made really quickly. And the longer it takes to make a law, the harder it is to make that law, the less likely it is that we'll have one person or one group seize power and try to pass tyrannical laws, or be able, I should say, to pass tyrannical laws. So they increased transaction costs, meant that, for example, they made two chambers, which meant that each bill had to pass both chambers, often with a majority, but sometimes with a supermajority. And these transactions take time, but the country's big, things happen quickly, and representatives are up for re-election every 2 years, so they only have limited time. So all of this together can lead to real struggles in getting laws passed. And that is why we use institutional structures to help solve these problems. We're going to look at one critical institutional structure in another video, and you'll be able to find more about all these institutional structures on your slide.